Okay, so uh, let's unpack this. We talk a lot about what LLMs, large language models, can do with language, but maybe we should focus on a fundamental constraint they have, one they kind of impose on themselves, which is that LLMs, right now, they have to express all their reasoning using language. Step by step. This whole chain of thought or COT idea, it forces every logical step into word tokens you can actually see.
Exactly. And, if you really think about that, it might not be the best way to handle complex thinking. It's a potentially suboptimal constraint. We have some contrasting evidence from how humans seem to work. Neuroimaging, for instance. It often shows that the language parts of our brain are surprisingly quiet during certain reasoning tasks.
Quiet, like inactive.
Yeah, or at least much less active. Think about spatial reasoning or working through a complex math problem or abstract stuff. It suggests that maybe for us, language is really optimized for communicating ideas or, writing down the results, not necessarily for the deep reasoning itself.
Hmm. That's interesting. So the core inefficiency here, it's like forcing, I don't know, a brilliant physicist to narrate every single thought, every equation variable out loud.
That's a good analogy.
Because a huge number of the tokens the LLM generates in a chain of thought are just filler, like textual coherence to make it sound right.
Precisely, making it read like smooth English.
Right.
But here's the kicker. Those coherence tokens cost the same amount of computing power as the really critical tokens, the ones that actually represent a leap in logic.
Which seems incredibly wasteful, computationally speaking.
It is. So the goal here for the researchers is actually quite elegant. Can we give LLMs the freedom to think without being tied to speaking every single internal step? Can we lift that language restriction?
Okay, and that perfectly sets up our deep dive today. We're going to explore this really novel paradigm called coconut that stands for Chain of Continuous Thought. This is some fascinating research coming out of FAIR, Meta's AI Research Lab, and UC San Diego. And the whole aim is to try and shift LLM reasoning out of this constrained world of language and into the latent space,
Yeah.
an unrestricted space. All right, this is where it gets really interesting for me. How does that actually work? How do you get an LLM to think without, spitting out words? This latent space reasoning. It must be different from just decoding text, right?
It is different, yeah, but the core change they made is surprisingly simple, conceptually at least. So normally an LLM processes its input and arrives at a final internal state. It's a big vector of numbers, the hidden state. You think of that hidden state as representing the model's current understanding or its continuous thought.
Right. And usually that state gets decoded into the next word token.
Exactly. The model picks a word, outputs it, and then that word often becomes part of the next input, standard KT. The coconut. It sort of breaks that loop. Instead of decoding that hidden state into a maybe noisy word token,
Yeah.
it just feeds the hidden state vector directly back into the LLM. Directly. As the input embedding for the next step, it completely skips the language output part for these internal steps. The model is essentially like talking to itself using its own internal language, its hidden states, not human words.
Whoa. Okay, so it has to switch then between modes, like language mode for reading the prompt and giving the final answer. But then it flips into this super fast, invisible, latent mode for the heavy lifting in between. How do they manage that switch?
They use special tokens. Think of them like markers.
Yeah.
Bot for beginning of thought and EOT for end of thought. These tokens signal to the model, okay, now you're entering or leaving the latent reasoning phase. Once it sees bot, it knows it can start chaining these hidden states together, feeding them back directly.
And these continuous thoughts, they're just numbers, right?
Yeah.
Vectors.
Just vectors, yeah. The LLM's internal state representation.
Yeah.
And this is crucial because they're just numbers. They're fully differentiable.
Okay, hang on. Fully differentiable, that sounds technical, but why is that so important here? What does that let the model do?
It's absolutely key. It means the entire reasoning process, including those silent, invisible thinking steps in the latent space, can be optimized from end to end using the standard methods, like gradient descent. Every single step, visible or invisible, contributes to the learning process.
So the model isn't kind of punished for thinking complex thoughts that don't map neatly onto words.
Exactly. It's actually rewarded for finding the most efficient path to the answer, whether that path involves language tokens or these silent, continuous thoughts.
That sounds like a huge advantage. But okay, here's a question that pops into my head. If the model is thinking invisibly in this, latent space, how do we know it's doing anything sensible? Isn't there a risk of creating an even bigger black box than we already have with LLMs?
That's a really fair point, and it's something the researchers definitely thought about. They do look into interpretability later on. But first, you have to actually teach the model how to use this latent space effectively. And for that, they used a clever multi-stage training approach. It was inspired by some earlier work on iterative COT, or ICOT.
Right. Tell us about that training strategy. How do you teach silent thinking?
Well, you don't start with silence. You start with what the model knows. Standard chain of thought. So stage one is just training it on problems using regular COT, making it learn the logic and language. Then in the following stages, they gradually replace some of those language-based reasoning steps with these continuous thoughts.
Gradually replace them. How?
So for instance, in their math reasoning experiments, they'd remove one language step from the COT and replace it with, say, two continuous thought steps. They represent this with a variable, 2LRs. So here, 2LRs. They found 2RT worked well for math problems. It's like a curriculum that slowly weans the model off, relying on explicit language for its internal logic.
Okay, so we've broken out of the language jail. We've got this mechanism for fast, invisible thought, and we know how to train it. So the big question, does it actually work? What does this mean for performance? Is the model genuinely better or faster or both?
The results are pretty compelling. More than just compelling, actually. It seems continuous thoughts don't just save time, they actually manage to enhance the LLM's reasoning capabilities overall.
And they confirm that chaining effect too, right? Like we know COT helps because each step makes the model effectively deeper.
Exactly. Outputting a token and feeding it back adds a sort of processing layer. They showed that chaining these continuous thoughts, these hidden states, in the latent space does the same thing. It boosts accuracy, particularly on math benchmarks like GSM-8K. As they increased the number of latent steps replacing each language step, accuracy generally went up. It shows you're getting that benefit of deeper thinking, just without the cost of generating all those words.
Okay, but the efficiency part, that's where it really shines, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The metrics are, frankly, staggering. This is where Coconut really makes its case. Let's take a logical reasoning dataset, ProntoQA. With standard chain of thought, the model generated, on average, about 92.5 tokens to solve each problem.
92 tokens, okay.
Coconut, achieving the same high level of accuracy, only needed to generate 9.EO tokens.
Wait, 9. From 92 down to 9.
9, yeah.
That's incredible. That's like a 90% reduction in the tokens just needed for the thinking process. That's the core efficiency gain right there.
It really is. And naturally, the inference time reflects that directly. Clock time is generally proportional to the number of tokens generated, right? So COT on ProntoQA took about 0.85 seconds per query. Coconut, it did the same job in just 0.11 seconds.
Wow. Okay, imagine scaling that up. Millions of queries. The savings in time and compute are just enormous.
Immense.
So it's definitely faster, much more efficient. But does this latent thinking unlock anything new? Does it enable better reasoning? Not just faster reasoning, because, faster is great, but smarter is maybe even more exciting.
And that's probably the most crucial finding in the paper, I think. It turns out latent reasoning really excels when it comes to complex planning. See, many reasoning tasks, even ones like ProntoQA that need lots of steps, are kind of straightforward once you figure out the path.
You just follow the logic.
Right. But the researchers wanted something tougher, something that really tested the model's ability to plan and search when the path isn't clear. So they introduced a new data set specifically for this.
This must be PROSQ.
PROSQA. Exactly. Proof with search question answering. This uses these complex, randomly generated graph structures, DAGs-directed acyclic graphs. The model can't just follow a simple chain. It has to actively search through branching paths, figure out dead ends. It really challenges its planning skills.
And this is where the limitation of standard QHE, forcing language output at each step, became a real bottleneck. Not just inefficient, but actually limiting performance.
Absolutely. It became a fundamental weakness. On PROSQV, standard QD showed basically no significant improvement over just trying to guess the answer directly, what they call no QD.
It just couldn't handle the search.
It seems like the need to commit to a specific word, a specific path, at every single step just crippled its ability to explore the complex graph effectively. It couldn't keep multiple possibilities in play.
But Coconut, with its latent space reasoning, this is where it really stood out.
It was a dramatic difference, a real triumph, you could say. Coconut and its variations showed substantial improvements on PROSQA, really high accuracy, like 97.0%. And it did this while still being super efficient, generating only about 14 tokens on average.
Okay, so that's strong evidence. Latent reasoning isn't just faster. It enables a qualitatively different and better approach to complex planning under uncertainty.
Precisely.
I thought that case study they included was really insightful, where the Coty model got stuck.
Oh, the hallucination example, yeah.
Right. It reached a dead end in the logic graph on ProSQA, and because it had to output something that sounded like a reasoning step, it just made up a connection, hallucinated a non-existent edge in the graph.
It prioritized sounding coherent in language over actually following the logical structure. That forced commitment at each step is the problem.
And latent reasoning avoids that.
Entirely. Because it's not under pressure to produce a fluent sentence at every internal step, it doesn't get forced into those kinds of logical errors when it hits a dead end. It can effectively pause, reassess, and explore other paths without leaving a wrong verbal trace.
This is fascinating. Okay, so that leads us to maybe the most mind-bending part of the research, the idea that this latent space isn't just faster, it actually develops its own kind of advanced internal way of thinking. What did they find when they tried to peek inside that continuous thought process? What kind of reasoning pattern emerged?
This is really cool. They found that the continuous thought mechanism seemed to naturally enable a reasoning process that looks a lot like breadth first search, or BFS.
Breadth first search, like in computer science algorithms.
Exactly like that. So instead of just following one single path step by step, which is what Cornty essentially forces the model to do, the continuous thought vector, that hidden state, seems able to encode multiple potential next steps at the same time, simultaneously.
Hold on. So it's not thinking just A, B, C. It's thinking more like A leads to maybe B or C or D all at once, holding multiple options.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It can maintain several possible options, several paths within those continuous thoughts, and then over subsequent steps, it progressively eliminates the incorrect paths. To figure this out, the researchers tried to interpret the hidden state. They treated it as an implicit value function.
An implicit value function. How on earth did they measure that? It's just a vector of numbers inside a black box, isn't it?
It is. But they used a clever technique. After one or two latent steps, they would essentially force the model to switch back into language mode. They'd look at the probabilities of the next word token the model would generate if they had to speak. By seeing which potential next steps, represented by nodes in the search graph, the model assigned a higher probability to, they could estimate how valuable the model considered each path at that point in its latent reasoning.
Okay. So a higher probability of generating a token corresponding to a correct next step implies that the current latent state is closer to the solution.
Exactly. It gives a window into how the model is evaluating the different paths it's implicitly exploring.
And what did this analysis show? Did the thinking change over time?
It showed a really interesting pattern. In the early latent steps, the analysis revealed significant diversity. The model was keeping lots of options open, exploring broadly across the graph, just like a breadth-first search. Parallel exploration. But then, in the later latent steps, as it got closer to the answer and more certain, the probabilities associated with the best paths became much stronger, much more concentrated. The reasoning became more focused.
Okay, I think I see it now.
Yeah.
This is the fundamental advantage for planning tasks like ProSQA, isn't it? Coconti forces you to pick one path very early on based only on local information, and you might pick the wrong one.
Right. You make a hard linguistic commitment up front.
But Coconut, with latent reasoning, avoids making that hard choice early. It keeps exploring multiple avenues in parallel, gathering more information.
Before it has to commit. It lets the LLM push its exploration much deeper into the problem space, closer to the actual solution, making it much easier to distinguish the truly promising paths from the dead ends.
It's like giving the LLM the power of look-ahead search, but in a very efficient internal way.
That's a great way to put it. It optimizes information gain before making that public tokenized decision, which is, well, the definition of better planning.
Fantastic. Okay, let's try to synthesize this. The big takeaway here seems to be that Coconut offers this powerful new approach. It lets LLMs reason way more efficiently. You mentioned that staggering 90% token reduction for thinking, which saves huge amounts of time and compute. But maybe more importantly, it allows them to reason more deeply, escaping the straitjacket of natural language. And that freedom allows for these emergent, advanced capabilities like the BFS-style parallel search, which helps tremendously on complex planning tasks where standard Coty struggles.
That sums it up really well. It's both faster and, in some crucial ways, smarter. And, if we loop back to where we started, that idea about language maybe not being the ideal tool for pure thought, here's maybe a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to sort of mull over. Right now, The way Coconut is trained still relies heavily on human-generated language examples of those COT chains as the initial supervision signal. That's how it learns how to shift to latent mode.
Right, it needs the language examples first.
But what might happen? What could emerge? If future LLMs were trained differently, perhaps pre-trained, purely using continuous thoughts right from the start, without that initial dependency on explicit human language reasoning chains, could that allow models to generalize their reasoning abilities even further, maybe across domains where we don't even have good language descriptions of the logic? Could it lead to, well, to genuinely novel forms of machine reasoning, forms that are perhaps quite alien to how humans think and communicate? That possibility, that's something to really chew on.